Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Club at the End of This World. I'm Jamin Shively, and we're going to start with personal updates before we get into agenda. And Victoria, if you want to kick us off, that would be great. My sister, Victoria. Take it away, Victoria.
Hello, everyone, and everyone, hopefully, who stops by. Good to see everyone, particularly our old friend Jason, who's recently moved. Things in Oklahoma are good today. I was just saying before we started, we had a flash flood warning yesterday. A lot of farmers are just kind of at the point of giving up planting this year because of the flood. We've got the lake closest to me is 27 feet above flood stage, so that gives you some idea of what we're dealing with. So it's been all over the news here about, the farm not planting, how there's not going to be wheat next year. They're talking about other things they can grow. I also thought it was interesting, and hope we can talk a little bit about the major networks that covered the Greenland ice melting this week. It's a double-edged sword. I was saddened and delighted to see it in the regular news. It's like for so long we've been wanting people to know what's going on, and now it seems like people know what's going on, but yet it's still looked at as so far out there around here. So anyway, that's my update. Good to see everyone.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. Great to see you. All right. Next update is from Miles. Take it away, Miles.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. So my name is Miles Flegg up here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And as usual, I always like to acknowledge the land that I'm on, and acknowledge that I'm at Mohkinstsis, the traditional Treaty 7 territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which stretches from Edmonton, Alberta, all the way down to Yellowstone National Park. That's the Blackfoot Confederacy territory. And our Canadian-U.S. border slices right through their territory. I'm in Alberta, a part of Treaty 7, which is the topic of this book by Dorothy Firstrider, who as I mentioned last time, I had the pleasure and honor of meeting. My update is, coincidentally, I've got a couple of books that I recently took delivery of, and this one's called Resilience, the Resilience Handbook, How to Survive the 21st Century by Elizabeth J. Walker. And it has a wheel on it, and it puts forward ideas for creating stronger communities, being ready, planning ahead, gathering resources. So some of the topics are having a network, repairing and reusing things, getting your own abilities and skills elevated, such as Jason's doing in Oregon by creating and planting his own gardens, doing crafts, using local materials, and cultivating other practical skills and so on. So interesting book, and definitely, I need to create more of those hands-on skills should the power go out. Something related is this book, Surviving the 21st Century, by Julian Cribb. Subtitle is Humanity's 10 Great Challenges and How We Can Overcome Them. And I'd like to put a plug for Collapse Chronicles and Sam Mitchell's recent interview of Julian Cribb. Really recommend everybody seek that out and listen to it. One of the things that he brings up, this Julian Cribb, is there's different kinds of refugees in the world. There are the refugees that are really helpless, and they're involuntary refugees. They're having to move because of heat waves, drought, floods, rising ocean levels and such. They're involuntary refugees. Now, there's another category called the voluntary refugee. And now these are people who actually have the wherewithal to pack up and move and, relocate, fly somewhere and establish a new home quite readily and probably go through all the red tape of getting approval from the receiving country. And when I heard that, it made a lot of sense to me, in that I'm here in Calgary, Alberta, which is a city of 1.2 million in area. We're a depressed economy right now because it's very much an oil and gas industry or economy. And since 2015, things have really taken a dive. And for the life of me, I could not understand how, if there is a glut of apartments and condos, why are they still building more? And then another thing that was peculiar to me is that airline sales, the sales of new aircraft, is actually quite robust. For example, this Boeing company, if it didn't have those 2 crashes that pulled their planes, their 737 MAX line, grounded them temporarily anyway, they had orders for 3,000 of those aircraft. And I'm thinking, gee, you wouldn't think that there's a world emergency here, ecological emergency. Everything seems to be chugging along pretty nicely. Condos being built, apartments being built, aircraft being sold. But then I thought, oh, wow, these voluntary refugees, they need a place to go and they need a means to get there. So Julian Cribb talks about, among other things, that sea level is going up 3 meters by the end of this century, and in some estimates, 5 meters. So there are hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people potentially affected. And they've got to go somewhere. That's my update.
Thank you, Miles. All right, let's get to some of those topics when we get past the personal updates. Next up, personal update is Dan. Take it away, Dan, if you're ready.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Dan from Chicago. I guess I would say that, as I said to a neighbor in my building, the other day when, he asked me what was going on or how was I doing. I hadn't seen him for a while. And, my response to him is doing the best I can as the planet implodes. And, there was another guy that was there, and they kind of, laughed a little bit at my answer, my greeting. And then I said to him, well, guys, I wish I was joking. And so, kind of going along with what Jason was saying earlier, it's on some level the need to accept what seems to be happening, even though you can't exactly tell how it's going to go down, where it's going to go down, at what time, and all of that. But so that's one thing that's been in my consciousness. The other thing is I'm a believer at this point that in the United States, and I'm simplifying it, and people can argue about the percentages, but it's almost as if we have this 50-50 divide, 2 different narratives. Half the country is all tuned into one narrative, half the country into a different narrative, and there's a mutual animosity, hatred between the 2 sectors. And, as I've mentioned many times, I try to tune in to both narratives, because each narrative, as far as I can see, has some important truth components to it. And to ignore the truth that one narrative has that the other doesn't is not a good idea. And so what I find, it's like I think of Guy McPherson always saying, with this, once I got the knowledge about exponential climate change. And even before then, I started losing all my family and my friends and my spouse, etc. And just over a different narrative. He had his narrative. Nobody in his life really was willing to examine it, apparently. And what I find here, because I'm living in Chicago, Chicago is one of the, Illinois is one of the bluest states. Chicago is a totally blue city. And the hatred of Donald Trump is just, it's so salient, so prominent. And whenever I say to somebody, something that in any way, shape, or form reflects on one of Trump's messages, the main one being, in my mind, the devastation to the country caused by the outsourcing of jobs over a long period of time. And in Chicago, that's relevant to the violence in the city. We never had these huge organized street gangs, etc., until Chicago was deindustrialized, and now we have it. And so, but not willing to hear that, even though kind of if you've been around Chicago for a long enough period of time, it's true. I mean, it's just totally obvious, and yet people don't want to hear it, and the politicians don't want to talk about it because it would be giving a little bit of credibility to one of the big messages that Trump used to get elected. And those messages are not the same as Donald Trump, the probably natural-born psychopath. Those are different things. Anyway, what I find is that I'm now sort of saying to people, rather than getting into these arguments, is I just say, well, and this doesn't win me any friends, but I go ahead and I say, the Central Intelligence Agency and other components of the deep state, which are mainly concerned with propaganda, the propagation of propaganda, have done a pretty successful job of dividing the population up. You can't get together anymore on common causes, which would be good for most people. And also, regrettably, you can't shake your narrative. We always hear about somebody being brainwashed or being inducted into a cult. And the deprogramming is extraordinarily difficult, sometimes impossible. And what we probably have going on now is we have, although there's definite elements of truth in the narratives, there's a brainwashing that's taken place on a kind of mass level. Two narratives, two different contents. But I find that to be really distressing, and of course, it does impact my life, and it also impacts getting together on climate change. That's my update.
Very good. Thank you, Dan. Next up is Arvin. Take it away, Arvin, if you're ready.
Hi, everyone. My name's Arvin, and I'm pretty new to the group, but I just wanted to give my personal update this time around. Got up the courage to do so. Basically, my wife and I, for the last couple of years, came up to speed on the fact that there's an environmental emergency at hand. And since then, we've been trying to get the word out, and to the point of the previous person speaking about deprogramming or programming. There's this deprogramming that's very difficult to do when just trying to get the message out that, hey, there's actually something we need to address constructively, which is a very difficult message to get across, and it takes time to change one's diet. So I'm not not at all trying to pass judgment or anything. It's not easy. But as far as this last week or so, my wife and I, we've just been, the weather here in Oregon. So I do live in Oregon, and Jason, love to connect with you. Maybe we live in nearabouts the same place. I live in Portland, the Portland, Oregon area. The weather's been great. We've been very fortunate here in the Pacific Northwest, and I think generally speaking, the weather, at least for the very, very short term of climate increase, hopefully will be good here. And I'm not sure what it would look like, of course, later on. But there's a very interesting report. I want to just kind of mention it to people in case it's not come across people's radar. It's called Risky Business. It's a Risky Business Project, and it was a report that was funded by Michael Bloomberg and Henry Paulson and a few others, and essentially predicted out what the world would be like 60, 70, 80 years from now. But this is using very, very conservative estimates on climate increase, around 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius 70 years from now, which of course doesn't seem very practical, but but at least it provides some information as to what the next, I don't know, however many years that would be, where we do see that 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius type temperatures, or maybe even a little higher. I think that report might cover it. So it's something to look up. And yeah, that's my personal update.
Great. Thank you, Arvin. Let's see. Next up is me for personal updates, and then we can get into agenda. Very good stuff, everyone. My update, on Saturday, Melissa and I went down to Seattle. First of all, I'm on here in Western Washington in the Puget Sound area, and on Coast Salish lands of the First Nations peoples of the Coast Salish tribes. Want to acknowledge that, and feel very blessed and honored to be here. It's such a beautiful area. And so on Saturday, Melissa and I went down to Seattle and participated in an event with Extinction Rebellion in the annual solstice parade in the Fremont neighborhood, if any of you know about that. Anyway, it's kind of a big deal. And so we brought down these giant salmon, artistic salmons, three-dimensional, that Melissa had built with a friend. And we were carrying those, and other Extinction Rebellion folks had built this big starving polar bear on a float, and others were holding signs with hearts and all that. And we actually got a fair amount of traction just getting the word out to the people who were on both sides of the street as we marched down the parade. And we would do chants and get the audience chanting and all that. So that was encouraging. Other personal updates, I'm just feeling kind of overwhelmed by all the bad news, from drought and people dying of thirst and exposure in India to the melting of the ice, the forest fires. It's really coming home to roost. And it's both bizarre to me that humanity has not figured out a way to come together and actually have an adult conversation about all this and what we can and might and must do in the face of all this. But also, very disturbingly, it also makes sense given all the factors that we've talked about on over the last couple of years on this very program as to why people are not waking up to the pot of boiling water that we're all swimming in. So anyway, just been kind of being with that, and then at the same time, in addition to the projects that we've got ongoing, I've been getting into a new project which I'm sworn to secrecy on, but has to do with a very high-profile local action and actually development project that may be taken on to have a very pronounced local impact on a community that's being threatened by climate change. And I'm happy to talk more about that, but I'm sworn to secrecy as to the details, so don't ask me about location or even what the nature of the project is. But part of the interest for me in that project is that it has the potential to get a lot of media attention and a lot of attention from the surrounding areas, and in fact the whole country and world. And for me, that's really exciting because, as most of you know, for the last couple of years, I've just been looking for where is the catalyst to catalyze this conversation that we need to have. The closest thing that we've seen to catalyzing a global conversation so far has been Extinction Rebellion and Greta Thunberg, and to a lesser extent, Guy McPherson. Anyway, that's kind of my personal update. I'd love to talk agenda, so feel free to just unmute your microphone and blurt out your thoughts as to what we should be talking about today. I've got some of my notes from last week, and last week we talked about, and this is something we haven't really done, at least systematically, but I'd like to begin to implement, which is to kind of take a brief review from our previous social club and see if it makes sense to kind of build on that for a number of reasons. Anyway, so last time we talked about how Canada had declared a national climate emergency, but then 2 days later approved a Trans Mountain pipeline, and the inconsistency there. And I kind of made a bold, radical statement that there is no fundamental inconsistency. We are all addicts to pipelines and oil and projects, in the case of the Canadian national government, projects that'll create jobs and boost industry in Canada. And at the same time, almost like in a different part of our brain, we're aware that we've got a planetary emergency, and what do we do about it? And there's a lot of this going on, right? Well, we Canadians, we need our pipeline because if we're going to compete in the world economy, we need our piece of the pie of the oil and gas sector. So of course, and we all, hey, United States, China, Russia, we all need to get together and figure out this emergency, right? So for me, there's really no big fundamental inconsistency there, but that's my personal opinion. Obviously, there is a major inconsistency, but I'm just kind of putting a different lens on it, that we can be both addicted and at the same time aware of our addiction and aware that we need to do something about it, even as we're groping for the heroin needle, right? Anyway, so that's one kind of big topic area. We also talked about tribalism, about the urgency, about the fact that we're running out of time. Guy McPherson would argue that we're out of time and that we're actually functionally extinct right now. And the urgency for humanity to figure out a way to get together and manifest its collective intelligence and this amazing potential that we have to come together and organize ourselves and figure out what we're going to do as a species. So the potential is there. Anyway, love to talk about that. And anything else. So please just unmute, jump in, and say what.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in and advance the concept of the compassionate community cafe idea. And just, I'm going to take it on as a personal challenge to, as I said last week, get out from behind this microphone and into the community. And I really know zero about running my own business, but maybe if I just simply go out somewhere with a pot of coffee or, kettle for some tea and see if I can't create this nucleus upon which something might grow locally, insofar as getting people talking and saying, because here it is in Canada, we do have declared an ecological or climate emergency. One thing I'll add with respect to the I guess what you'd call neurosis of what's happening here in Canada, and that you declare a climate emergency one day and then the next day you approve this big, huge pipeline. And then the third day, something else that's happened is there's now a tanker ban. There's legislation to prevent oil tankers on the northwest coast of British Columbia. And there's now a new environmental assessment process that is about to come into legislation, into law. And that will make approval of projects very, very difficult. So it's like they want to get this last pipeline built and then shut things down. But anyway, digressing, but I do have this national climate emergency to build upon, and to, go out into the community with a pot of coffee or a kettle and make tea and say, okay, so what are we going to do about it? And maybe it's about, doing what Jason's doing, growing our own food, other resilience type activities. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Miles. Good. Duly noted. Love your spirit there, to get out there into the community. Anyone else want to jump in with thoughts for agenda items for today? All righty. Well, I want to prioritize the folks who jumped on during their lunch break and need to...
I will actually, if I could just interrupt, I'm sorry I have to bid everybody adieu, but I do look forward to whatever you converse on with respect to the agenda. So best of luck, best wishes to everybody.
Great. Thank you, Miles. Great to see you. Thanks for chiming in. All right. And on that same token, Victoria, did you want to jump in? I'd love to hear your thoughts more on the Greenland ice melting, that being in the regular news, and just what you've seen about that. If you could give us a little update, and then your thoughts and feelings about that. Bittersweet.
It is bittersweet to me, Jamin. Like I say, 2 years ago, I can't believe it's 2 years when started doing this and talking to people more. I don't particularly talk unless people are open to it anymore. I used to feel the need to tell them. I don't. It's, I watched Paul Beckwith's latest videos last evening, and a lot of times I try to not think about it, but yet there it is. So I'm curious, Jason, to hear how you find Oregon as far as people knowing about the message, knowing what's happening. Is there more denial, less denial? I find here that we are in the midst of, obviously, all this flooding and not so much tornadoes, because with the jet stream having shifted a little bit, it's hitting more toward Joplin and those kind of things this year. But it's just kind of a catch-22. I talk about it if people want to talk about it, but I find myself just doing how I feel about it, Jamin, is just doing what I can in front of me and trying to stay open-minded.
Gotcha. Any more on Greenland? Like, what, if you could just kind of give a quick synopsis?
Just about how it's melting so much faster than the models had predicted. And, they're finding out that there's a lot more underneath. In other words, just the weight. They're trying to figure out even if that's going to have any impact, because I can't remember if it was 2020, 60 Minutes or, Inside Edition, one of those, but it was also mentioned on NBC and CBS, I'm sure. But just about the fact that it's in the mainstream news about how much quicker it's happening in Greenland than they anticipated.
Yeah.
But yet I've heard no one talking about it, and I'm not opposed to those conversations, but I don't initiate them so much anymore.
Yeah. No, I totally hear that. I'd much rather not preach to the choir, but have conversations with the choir than try to preach to the people on the street, because it can be so draining. And at the end, what for? I mean, if they've got their position or they're just kind of lost in space on it, you know.
And sometimes people don't want to know.
Yeah.
Do
Very
not
true.
want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So no one.
Jamin,
Yeah.
if I could, just kind of add on to that a little experience I had. I went the other day to see this movie called The Last Black Man in San Francisco. I don't know if any of you've seen that. And I went with my girlfriend, and of course she's one of somebody who she understands what in her mind what may be happening and doesn't want to hear about it, etc. And there was this, and The Last Black Man in San Francisco, the underlying theme is kind of the tremendous gentrification that happened with, Fillmore being completely gentrified out. And I don't know, there may be still some small number up in Hunters Point in that area. But anyway, but in this movie, there is this guy who gets up on this little platform, and he's doing this preaching every day. And there's only two individuals, two of the protagonists in the movie, listening to him, just kind of, and are kind of saying, this is, the guy's got a problem, But I took that, and then my girlfriend, she joked, she said, that's you. And, and what that all just reflects is, and Jamin, you personally, you went through a lot. You were out there on the street corner, at the intersection, all these different places, doing it, and then they just, it's like they can't differentiate between that and, somebody, Jehovah's Witness person going on and on. And so I just thought I, kind of throw it in there, but in that particular movie, and actually I wouldn't have gone to see it if I knew exactly how it was, but I'm glad I went, because in a lot of ways it was a pretty good movie. But it showed these glimpses of things that people are aware of, the homeless population. There was one scene in where one of the protagonists, this young African-American man, he's sitting at a bus stop, and then this nude white guy walks up and takes a seat next to him. And so there you are, and then this streetcar comes by, and it's full of, people partying and everything. And they start, ridiculing the people there in a pretty, offensive way. And so, you get these kind of glimpses of that's reality today. And people are kind of aware of it, but we don't have, unfortunately, the ability to synthesize a coherent narrative that takes the elements from both sides of the narrative, both narratives, and puts them together. And also, watching this San Francisco, and I used to, I lived in San Francisco for a couple of years. I actually lived in the Fillmore district for about 7 months. And I remember, this is in the late 60s. And I remember how, San Francisco was. It was still, in a lot of ways, there were still large segments, large neighborhoods. We were just, blue collar working class neighborhoods in the city. And how rapidly it changed. And but there was a past there. There's past, and now we have the present, and we're going to now get a future. And I just think, without being able to connect the past, understand what the problems are really in the past, and then understand how that's impacted the present, and then maybe you have a chance of going forward into the future with more viable solutions or reactions. Whereas if you don't really even understand what's led to a certain place, it's very hard to go forward. So I just wanted to throw that in there, kind of add that on. Thank you.
Good stuff, Dan. Yeah. Yeah, it's so complex. Right now, there's no one in the queue. I just want to acknowledge that. So I'm just going to riff for a minute. And while there is no queue, just feel free to jump in. Just getting to, for me, the central the way I see it, there's really two big problems that the world has. One is abrupt climate change and the sixth mass extinction and all that. And the second is far more subtle, is our inability as a species to deal with the first, to come together and actually have an organized planetary scale conversation. I mean, what might that look like? Well, in World War II, what happened? The Allies formed an alliance, got together, communicated with their respective populations about the crisis and what we're going to do about it. And yes, there's going to be sacrifices and rationing and a draft, and we've got wars to fight here. And you see that, and today that's not happening. We have something far more lethal than a world war on our hands, at our doorstep, killing us as we speak. And yet, where are the newsreels? Where is NATO? Where's the United Nations? Where are these organizations of organizations of governments, etc., coming together and, number one, talking amongst themselves, and number two, communicating with their respective populations? It's simply not happening. It's not happening at the governmental level. It's not happening in academia. It's certainly not happening in the private sector. And it's barely, on the fringes of the media, right? Mostly alternative media, but as Victoria mentioned, increasingly in mainstream, but in a very watered down form. I'm reminded of when, prior to the United States getting into World War II, people talked about, oh, that funny little man in Europe, Hitler. Well, isn't he cute, right? There's a similar degree of, yeah, it's there, but this climate change thing. That funny little man in Europe, Hitler. Hey, Adam, welcome. There's a similar degree of, yeah, it's there, but this. I hear myself talking. Oh, thanks, Adam. Appreciate it. All right, Dan's in the queue, so Dan, take it away.
Yeah. So again, just kind of following up on what you were saying, Jamin, and a little bit of what I was kind of saying, and even synthesizing in what we were talking about last week. So in the progressive community, progressive liberal community, a lot of people in the country who identify as a progressive liberal or just a progressive are attached to the Democratic Party, and that's the Democratic Party base, so to speak. And there's different factions, but I think that when it comes to abrupt exponential climate change, and I know that I believe that as we go through now the summer of 2019 in the Northern Hemisphere, and we move into whatever else is coming, there will be much more awareness of what we may actually be looking at. And if there's anything that can be done, people will want it done. But I think that this issue of the urgency and the time factor. Think how illogical people are. It's almost as if, okay, we got Guy McPherson. Guy is right now, 2026, he'd be amazed if there was a human being on the face of the planet. That's coming right up. I mean, it's ridiculous. Then we have people now willing to say maybe 2050, it doesn't look very good by 2050, and we still have people talking about stuff that's even further out. They keep putting out this stuff. Some people do it intentionally, others just do it because that's what they think is appropriate and the most valid information. But if you look at things, why wouldn't we think about that maybe Guy McPherson is closer to what's coming than somebody who's out there 2050 to 2100. And human psychology will not respond to 2050 to 2100. It won't happen. And so you would think if maybe Guy McPherson's wrong and we do have some time, that's what the social club has always been premised on, that actually we do have enough, if the world could just do what it needs to do, maybe we could save the planet. But you would think that let's operate on the risk. Guy McPherson or something close to Guy McPherson could be correct. So why are we just sitting around, debating about, Donald Trump, even with the immigration, which I was talking about last week. Central America is one of the ground zeros for climate change refugees. The subsistence farmers in Central America, they can't grow their food. And so once you kind of get that awareness, I and my family can't eat, you start to go up north. And without acknowledging that kind of a reality, and it's southern Mexico, northern South America, forgetting about the other parts in the world, as Jamin mentioned, India and Bangladesh is, and I was talking about the militarized borders last week that are being, factored in. And so if we can't even talk about, for example, climate change refugees, and what is it that we want to do ethically, morally? What does the world want to do? And to look at it in a kind of realistic way, because what will happen at a certain point is people right now, they talk about the immigration about, we don't want, Trump and his people, they don't want the brown people to come into the country. They're racist and they're fascist and we have concentration camps on the border, et cetera, et cetera. But I do not hear in a, with any kind of a salient voice that these are climate change refugees. There's lots more of them that are either coming or they're going to die. They're not just trying to come here to get free medical care or whatever and better economic conditions. It's really about survival, living, breathing, dying. And so, but that just can't get in there. I have a very good friend. Well, he's not a friend, but he's somebody I worked with, I guess, and I would consider him a friend. Over a good period of time, he was down in Honduras for a number of years, and that's one of his most heartfelt areas of advocacy is what's happened. What happened to the people in Honduras and others, and even though he understands climate change. I once actually tried to bring him on board, with some advocacy, and he didn't really want to go there, even though he wasn't, rejecting what could happen. But I still don't see from him or others that's kind of a recognition. It's, yeah, you know, the regime there, the elites who control Honduras and all the other Central American economies and countries, they basically, you know, that people who get driven off the land, hey, we've got some sweatshop slave labor places maybe in the cities you can find a way of surviving. That level, well, that's wrong, you know, kind of a thing, but not the climate change factor. And what does that ultimately mean for us as human beings? You know, like that little thought experiment, then I'll stop, the thought experiment that I brought up last week. You know, if you're told that you and your wonderful family can stay in the United States and have at least food and water and better infrastructure for however long, but we can't let anybody into the country. Because if we just let the country opened up to the millions and tens of millions and hundreds, you know, no end to it, into the country, then everything goes down. Do you want to stay alive in your sheltered country or not? But we're not going to let the people in. And you know, do you want to stay, or if you don't want to stay, then leave, and we'll let somebody else come in to replace you, who will be more than happy to sign on to that. And that's a harsh reality, but it's what you can see in the future coming. You know, again, as I mentioned, the United States military has been planning for some sort of contingency like that since the mid-1990s. I'm sure they don't believe Guy McPherson's 2026 is coming, but they're more, you know, 2040, 2050, well, a little ways out, and then we're going to do it. We should be talking about that because, you know, what kind of future do we really want to have under conditions that are probably at best going to be considerably more dystopian? So I just wanted to throw that in there, and I'm going to turn it over to somebody else.
Good stuff, Dan. Thank you. All right, we got Adam in the queue who just joined. I just want to comment briefly on what you just said, Dan, and also on what Miles commented on earlier about, you know, getting out there with a thing of coffee, a big pot of tea, whatever, and starting to have the conversation. What are we going to do about this climate emergency? The project that I mentioned, which I can't give details on because I'm sworn to secrecy, but that has to do with actually a fairly major development, project development to seek a radical solution at a local level to the climate change crisis in affecting one particular community. You know, this addresses that second problem of humanity not figuring out how to come together yet. I'm thinking, you know, there's a well-known kind of concept when it comes to this sort of radical, you know, starting a movement kind of work, which is go to where people are feeling the pain, right? This community is feeling the pain, the one that I can't talk about. And so by going there and jumping right into the middle of this conversation of, do we do this major development project or this other, or do we do nothing at all? There are plenty of people in denial there as well. I'm looking for the loose thread on the sweater that can unravel the whole thing and finally break people loose to start talking about this and grappling with it in a big systematic way, which I feel like we're on the verge of. So next up is Adam, followed by Victoria. Adam, Victoria may have to go fairly soon, so if you want to either yield to her or be brief so Victoria can squeeze in before she has to go. Yeah, okay. Victoria, why don't you go first and then followed by Adam. Take it away, Victoria.
All right. Thanks so much, Adam. Yeah, I hate to go today. This sounds like it's going to be a great discussion, so I look forward to getting in this evening and continuing. You know, it's talking what you were just talking about, and you said something that we don't talk about a lot on this social club, in my opinion, is how do you feel? I know because we're trying to enact actions to stop it, to change it. But I'm just curious. I know we're all trying to do actions and what can we do? I don't know. I'm just curious how everyone is feeling about this because, I had someone recently say to me, which I think is not fair at all to say about Guy McPherson. Guy's making projections more than anything based on data we have rather than like, oh, he prophesied that. No, he never said he was a prophet, never claimed to be a prophet, never set himself up to be. But, we thought we'd have a Blue Ocean event, which wasn't actually his projection, but he went and interviewed the gentleman who it was. And so that bought us a few years. And it's just very interesting because the people I was speaking about this 2 years ago and today are like, who knows, this. And it's almost as if we take a few facts and put them over here, it could override all of the known facts that we know will cause some big harm to all of us. So I'm just curious how on this particular, how all of us are feeling about all of this, because we're in the midst of it. And I know I'm not the only one that's always reading and looking at who's put out new reports and where we are. And in Oklahoma, I see them talking about weather this year. But again, and I've said it before, I come from the land of Jim Inhofe and some other politicians who have done a really good job of convincing, not just in Oklahoma, but Texas and, that, hey, this is just all a hoax to make money. And, Trump blames it on the Chinese. And I am shocked, and maybe you would be too, to see how often I hear that it's a Chinese hoax. So just throw that out there and love to see you guys. And I'll come home and see what everyone says. Thanks so much. Appreciate you greatly. Have a wonderful week. Off to work.
Thanks so much, Victoria. So great to see you. All righty. Adam, you've been patient. Thank you, buddy. Adam's next in the queue and followed by Jamin. Take it away, Adam.
All right. So you can hear me okay? All right. So the way I feel about it is I feel like it's not time to have feelings. It's time to act and to work as hard as we can. And so I've been doing that, and I'm trying to, I'm trying to develop a website and so I've been working with an application with the IRS for an exempt status for this nonprofit corporation that I've started. And there's a lot of things I've realized in doing this. See, humanity, we don't have any place to come together, and we don't have an answer to that tells us what to do, and so nobody knows what to do, and every time we try to think of how to solve these problems, the same thing gets in the way, and I think that thing is money. So when you start imagining how we could live without money, then the answers do come into play, and you are able to see, like, I keep talking about the platform, and the platform would be a place where we can use our modern technology, and all people can come together on the platform. And to get it started, it doesn't even have to be that many people. And what would make the platform work is on there we build a vision of the future. The reason we haven't been able to build a vision of the future is because we always try to include money in that vision. So we try to figure out how we're going to, how we're going to pay for everything, how we're going to work an economy into it. And that's not the way of the future. Einstein said, you can't fix the problems using the same methods that you used to create them. If we use money to get out of it, it won't work. There'll be too many hurdles. We won't be able to create the vision of the future. And so if we are able to create the vision of the future that we want, then we can prepare for this. I mean, we need to know like how to eat. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing is how to get our food, and so that's one area where we really need to concentrate on. We don't need to concentrate on who's going to pay for it or anything like that. When we come up with a plan, and all we have to do is figure out where it's going to come from. People will volunteer. It's just like we did for World War I and II. We retooled our factories. We adjusted our lives. When people realize that there can be something done, then they'll want to join on the bandwagon. They'll want to join. And so the difficulty I've been having is I'm thinking that this platform will be expensive, and it'll cost billions of dollars. And so I've been working to try and get tax exemption, because when I ask for lots of money, I want elite people to come on there, very wealthy people to come on there and donate millions of dollars. And I know this sounds crazy, but that's what I want, and that's the way I think it will work. And in order for them to donate millions of dollars, I've been thinking, well, the platform can't start until we have enough money built up. So we need probably $7.7 billion is what I'm thinking. $1 for everybody in the world. Well, it's going to take a little bit of time before we get that much money. And if we don't get that much money, if it doesn't happen, I want to be able to return these people's money. Well, trying to return money from donations gets really complicated and difficult. And I don't know. I think I'm just out of my league here. So I'm just going to just try to get the message out, and hopefully somebody will be able to get this platform going. I mean, so the platform has to be attractive. I mean, and it has to be attractive to people. There has to be. I mean, right now people go to the wide world of poker, and because it's an attraction, because the people like to play money. So there could be a lot of attractive things on this platform that'll bring people to it, not just to create a vision, but other things. And so I'm exploring those areas, and even using money as some kind of an attractive method to bring people to the platform. I'm even exploring that area. The vision that we create cannot use money because that won't work. And we also have if we're going to live on this planet for another million years, we have to adopt a lifestyle that can live. And we can't keep living if we're going to keep risking. So we nuclear power is a huge risk. If a species of life is going to last for a long time, they're not going to take risks like that. But why do we risk? Because there's money to be made. It's just like Dan said, if somebody doesn't do it, somebody else will. And wherever there's money to be made, that's what will happen. We'll take advantage of it. And that's why we're so confused and so messed up, I think. So we can find our way out by building a platform, and I'm just working on this as hard as I can. And that, working on it is what brings me peace. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Adam. Thank you. Next up in the queue is Jamin, followed by Dan. So I want to answer Victoria's question. How do I feel about all this? Horrible, and that brings me to fundamentally go into two different modes. One is action, and another is escape. I'll leave the escape aside for a moment because that's kind of very personal. But in terms of action as the antidote to despair, of course, most of you know I've been trying a number of different things, leading a number of different projects, participating. Oh, Arvin wants to be in the queue. Okay, gotcha. By the way, Arvin, do you know how to type in your name into the chat window? Because that's how we put ourselves into the queue. But if you don't know how to do that, fine, you can just wave your hands. Okay, cool. You might want to just give it a little test. But so the action I'm focused on now, and I want to draw in the feeling part. It's around this big project for a specific community to address its very acute problem with climate change. At the center of the topic is an engineering project that we can do, but the first stages of the project would be about getting people together to have the conversation and find a really attractive way to bring people into the conversation. And because it's so local, it's so specific, this one measure that this community could take, I think that, will break through a lot of the barriers that people have around talking about climate change and the planetary crisis, because they don't see a solution. So why talk about some big problem for which there's no solution? It's almost like talking about death itself or something like that, right? But because this is local and because it involves a specific solution and people can debate about it, it seems like a perfect way to bring people together. It may be that entrance to the wormhole that we've been looking for to, get humanity to finally connect and come together along the lines of the platform that Adam was talking about, which Adam's working on a platform. I and Radish are working on a platform. And we, have a large amount of overlap, but not complete overlap. That's a crucial part of it. But we also need to have some place, some physical place where people finally come together and form a critical mass that cannot be ignored and in fact attracts other people and therefore attracts media. And we get a sort of a snowball going, starting in one particular place. That's my current main focus of the different areas that I focus on. But even in that one place, we would start and have regular meetings about feelings and about grieving and about gratitude and about all the softer stuff. Adam, you mentioned, we don't have time to feel, it's time to act. But I think that, particular to our species is, that we're driven by, a number of soft factors, not just hard facts. We're not robots. I kind of wish we were sometimes, but, I think the feelings are unavoidable. And really, there's a certain amount of unity that needs to be built and a culture around facing this together that we don't quite yet have. And I think that feelings and emoting and grieving together and doing a lot of this sort of softer work, shall we say, is really going to be important for getting us together for the harder stuff. Next in the queue is Dan, followed by Arvin. And Arvin, I still don't know if you can type your name in. It'd be great if you just type your name in, just so we can see that you've got that modality established. Take it away, Dan, followed by Arvind.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts on different issues that people have brought up. You know, the issue of having feelings about what's going on. And yes, you know, it is important to, even on the level of actually knowing how significant it actually is. You know, and at the same time, you can't remain in a emotional state, you know, because it's hard to organize and function while you're in that state. And I think that but that would be kind of useful to talk about. But just thinking, you know, it's so hard to actually talk about it. You know, in what aspect of it? You know, how horrific it's going to be to have humans go extinct, how painful it's going to be to lose all of my loved ones, friends, associates, myself, how existentially overwhelming it is to even imagine that. You know, I go back to that old video, that YouTube of Guy McPherson when he's in New Zealand talking to that guy. I think his name was Paul or Pat Henry. And you know, and he's sort of a New Zealand version of, you know, a Fox News cablecaster. And, you know, he says, well, you know, Guy, I haven't seen you for a couple of years. Are things still as bad as they were? And, you know, Guy, he just sits there and deadpans, you know, well, Pat, they're considerably worse. And then he goes on to, you know, gives his usual kind of a talk. And this guy, he says, well, that means, you know, my daughter who's over the, you know, standing over there isn't going to have a life. And he then goes and says, you know, even though I appreciate your rationality, you know, he acknowledges, you know, he says, I don't think people are ever going to be able to sign on to what you're saying. Just the overwhelming reality of this is all here. How could this ever go away? And I remember, you know, with my son who is deceased now, but I used to have a conversation with him, and I may have mentioned this before, but I used to have a conversation with him about he was more or less an atheist, and I was always kind of more agnostic, you know, maybe, you know, how, it was kind of like, how could all this be if there isn't something transcendent? And therefore I you know, but the, you know, the thing is that is overwhelming. It's very hard to actually, you know, if you go to a place where it just seems very, very empty in a way, where on one hand, where none of this has any meaning. But, you know, whether I do good things, bad things, whatever, it has no real meaning. You know, and then, but the thing is, to be stoic, you know, to actually be able to be stoic in the face of what may be coming is, you know, that's a tried and true method for dealing things. So I think, you know, you would need to have a mix of kind of an emotional discussion where people could actually talk about, hey, this is how I feel. It breaks me down. All I can do is cry. But on the other hand, to also understand that without being stoic about many things that may come to pass, it's very, very hard to deal with anything. So I just wanted to throw that in. And one other thing, in terms of discussions, I haven't been there for quite some time, but I used to go to a place in Chicago called the College of Complexes. It's an old kind of free speech forum that for the last, probably the last 20 years, so it goes all the way back into the 1950s. And but people come and they give a talk, and then people get to ask questions, and then they get to take 5 minutes and say whatever they want to say about the presentation or anything else. It's a very, very good kind of an atmosphere, and people really like to be able to get together. And at the College of Complexes, you get dinner if you want. It's usually in a banquet room or part of a restaurant, and people are eating while the presentation is going on. And I do think that's something, Jamin, that could be easily integrated into, the idea of compassionate cafes, this kind of thing. But at the end of the day, people have to work hard to be able to assimilate, what is reality. And you can't say, which is what really is going on, no, that's too horrible. Can't go there. Don't want to think about that. And there's all sorts of rationalizations, that wouldn't be good for, children to have to take in. But yet children kind of are starting to take it in more than a lot of adults. And again, just one final thing. And I was at a restaurant with my girlfriend, and we were talking, and I was kind of going on about false flags, false flags back to, when the Nazis burned the Reichstag, and that was pinned on the communists, the communist false flag. And, we can go to Gulf of Tonkin, the Vietnam situation, and we can go to more recently the weapons of mass destruction, the chemical weapon usage in Syria. So I'm there, kind of going on, and my girlfriend is just sort of, listening like, I'm that guy on the little platform talking. But it was interesting. There were two young women in probably no more than their mid-20s that was sitting off to the side. They were, I'm not sure whether they were waitresses or they were working at the restaurant. And one of them was Caucasian, the other was an African-American woman. And they both just sort of came in, to the conversation and started talking about the problem with the false flags. And I thought, there are these people, these young people who actually know this, have assimilated it, and are really anxious to, be able to talk about it. And yet people who are older, who've gone through all of that, the Vietnam War, and everything else after that, have become so warped in terms of their grasp on many aspects of reality, that it's a real problem. So I'm going to just wanted to throw that stuff in there, a little bit random, but okay, thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Up next is Arvin. Take it away, Arvin.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Dan, for that note. If at some point during my sharing, if you lose my video feed, just please proceed, because I've had a poor internet connection. But anyway,
you know what you might try,
I
Arvin,
guess I wanted to.
is you might turn off your video camera, and then that'll give
Mhm.
more bandwidth to the audio.
Okay.
Just one thought. Anyway, back to you.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give that a shot. Okay, so I wanted to jump into the conversation because there's so many things that resonated with me, things I've been thinking about. Jamin, at one point you mentioned we need to bring people into the conversation, and you're looking at a community and potentially helping that community and seeing that delta and that being an example for the world. I think that's terrific. And that general idea that you also mentioned, that we don't want to talk about a problem if there's no solution. And it's like talking about death. I really think that that's terrific. It's a very good, insightful perspective. And what Nandini and I are doing is we're also trying to build a platform, much like Adam, you're talking about, and that's great. I don't know, our specific ideas, I'm sure, are very different. But yeah, I think the idea is that for us, it's about what we can do, so what the average person can actually change. And our diet is the biggest one. From 1750 to 2015, according to the IPCC, we humans have added 240 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere. And if we were to switch to a vegan diet and reforest just 41% of the extra land, we could remove 265 gigatons of carbon. And that's something that, so that's more carbon that we added to the atmosphere. And that's something that Sailesh Rao has presented to the European Parliament. And it's very practical. It's substantive. It's very difficult, of course, for the great majority of us. But it's something that we can do. And it doesn't require space age type technology, or technology that would take 50 to 100 years. It's actually right now we can do this. And it took, according to the simulations, 80% of that carbon sequestration can happen in 20 years. So whether or not we can move quickly enough is really the question to me. So what we're doing is, we're trying to get the message out. I think that if we have been talking to people, I don't think I can reach people that are climate deniers. But those that believe in climate change and that believe that, I think that the popular sort of notion is that we'll reach 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030 if we continue with business as usual. That's sort of the more mainstream type news that CNN is reporting. And if we can reach those people with, hey, wait, actually, that's not the full story. It's actually worse than that. And provide a solution. I think part of it, yes, plant-based diet, and yet some type of platform, much like, again, Adam was talking about, and others. And yeah, that's what we're working on. My wife is a software programmer, so we're hoping to create something. But yeah, I guess that's sort of our update, and what we're thinking about.
Beautiful. Thank you, Arvind. Would love to talk with you about the platform, what you guys have in mind. In fact, maybe we could all get together and have a focused conversation on that, you and your wife and Adam and I and whoever else wants to join that one. We could do a deep dive on that. So I'm next in the queue, followed by Dan. And I'm going to resume the practice of timing just so we can have some measure of awareness on that. So, you said something interesting, Arvind. You said, I can't reach climate deniers, right? And I think that's a really powerful point. We keep talking about the platform and getting people together, but I think the reality that we have to face is that all of us are in one stage or another of denial, myself included, all of us included. And, so even if we had this beautiful technological platform ready to go, there would be very few of us who are actually ready to partake in the conversation that needs to happen, which is, how do we radically transform life on Earth. Using collective intelligence, using all these tools and awareness that we have, with 99.99% of humanity in one stage of denial or another. How do we get enough people out of denial that are really ready for the real conversation that needs to happen, which is, in many ways a very challenging, very painful conversation to have.
Right.
And so this gets to what I talked about earlier is my current focus. How do we find this one location where the local population there is just really ripe to have the conversation because they are personally impacted, and reduce the scope of the conversation down to something manageable that they can sink their teeth in, like a local project to protect them, something that's very tangible. This topic of climate change, it's too big for people to wrap their heads around, particularly at the stage of denial where they're at. And so I'm kind of envisioning a progressive evolution pathway. And by the way, an evolutionary pathway to get us maybe first focusing on a local issue and then expanding from there. And what's exciting about this local project that I'm sworn to secrecy on is that I think it could be kind of a bridge from going from the local to the global, because, we're talking about a fairly significant investment in a mitigation project. But then the question comes up, well, wait a second. If planetary climate conditions keep getting worse and worse and worse, the cost and the cost of these mitigation projects is going to go up, and their viability is going to go down, et cetera, et cetera. And so, there's a natural, tendency to go from the specific mitigation project to, hey, let's go upstream a bit. What's causing all this? And how can we influence that? And so anyway, I just wanted to mention that's kind of my current thinking as to how we can, break out of this quagmire that we're in, because that ultimately needs to be our goal. Not that we build some great platform that people aren't ready to use, but we simultaneously need to work on the platform and the specific location, that specific singularity where we can get a critical mass of people working on it in a way that draws in the media and draws in other people into the conversation, and we grow from there. So what is the pathway that'll get us from where we are now to where we need to get to? That for me is the big question. And it has different parts to the answer. All right, up next is Dan, and I think Dan's the only one in the queue right now. Okay, very good. So take it away, Dan.
Yeah. So, like I was mentioning last week about the vegan diet, which I'm moving towards, and that's rational, very rational. However, just thinking about the grain crops, cereal crops, grain crops around the world. Here in the United States, one of the biggest producers, of wheat, corn, soybeans primarily. If we get a very serious wipeout, whatever percentage this year, and we still have a growing season we got to get through. Right now it's just about how much damage because of planting problems. We still have to see what happens when things maybe start to really heat up, etc. But in any case, if there is a serious wipeout when you get around to the harvest, then what's going to set in, it's not just that prices of food are going to go up. there's going to be, especially in light of more consciousness about climate change, there's going to be a little bit of a panic or high anxiety about what if this happens again? What if in 2020 we get another wipeout? You know, and then, you know, it's just like a question of having food, period. And once that sets in without people actually thinking about it, what happens is you get, it feeds a regression. It feeds people into survival kind of a mentality. And they're not prepared for that. Our population is no way prepared. And so I just wanted to bring that up, and then I want to bring up the thing that I introduce frequently, and I'm working on something probably be my last presentation that I ever create, and I'm thinking of titling it Psychopathy, Tribalism, and Climate Change Denial, or Climate Change. And the thing is, with tribalism, you look at for example, the situation with Iran, which has been big in the news. We were about to launch a military attack. Trump hears 150 people are going to be killed, changes his mind, accelerates the sanctions, the economic sanctions. But you think about the underlying dynamic. Here we have Iran, which is run by Islamic fundamentalists, Shia Islamic fundamentalists, who basically generally believe that the world is going to end and their version of Jesus is going to be there. This is a religious fundamentalist tribalism. Probably lots of people in Iran are not signed on to it, but they know that under this theocracy, they're not going to be long for the world if they say anything. That's a problem of this religious fundamentalist tribalism. And then you look at here, Trump and the Christian fundamentalists, his biggest base of support. And that's what that's what they believe. They fundamentally believe, as a matter of fact, the sooner the end times come, the better, because then we get raptured up to the good place. And those who, weren't able to see things, too bad for you. How can we have this? How are you ever going to solve anything as long as this is allowed to go on? And that means that people have to step up to a meta level and say, this stuff is a huge problem. Sorry. We can't have it. It's just so maladaptive in terms of what's going on. And just the final thing, and you look at what's happened. I'll use Israel as an example. Israel many decades ago was a more kind of benevolent type of a place and culture. You had almost a kind of socialistic component to it. However, over the years, over many decades, the basic underlying reality has kind of been recognized, which is that, if the other tribe, let's say the Sunni Islamic tribe or the Shia Islamic tribe or whatever, if they ever had the power to do so, they will exterminate us. So what does that mean when, that's the underlying, really now it's almost up there in consciousness with politicians in Israel, certain ones actually talking about, hey, extermination of them is not such a bad idea. That's what they would do to us, and vice versa. And so, we just, you can't allow, the denial of what we're like as human beings. And things like this, they need to be talked about, because it really, and it just, probably too late anyway, but without taking down the tribalism, these barriers to cooperation, and that means recognizing what's going on in terms of how a psychopath always views the other people as being prey, and always assumes that just the way he is, like, say Donald Trump, other people would be just like him if they were in a position to do so. Therefore, that justifies anything he does to anybody else that he can get away with. And so we should be talking about these things. People should be able to get together and discuss it, and to, in a sense, definitely final word. I always thought with Christianity, I thought that Jesus represented sacrifice, an altruistic sacrifice for the group. That's fundamentally what his story was. Altruistic sacrifice of himself for the group. That didn't come out of nowhere. That's hardwired into us too. But just like psychopathy is there, latent, hardwired in, depending on various things. But now you have this, here in the United States, this Christian fundamentalist kind of a thrust, which would like to turn us into a theocracy, even though probably can't happen, but they would like to. How can we have, Donald Trump, who of course is not a fundamentalist, he just sees that as it's useful to him. But how can we have that base have such influence on the country? That's it. I'll check out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. All right, up next in the queue is Adam, followed by Jamin, and then I want to volunteer my brother Fred to contribute his thoughts. All right, take it away, Adam.
Okay, so you were talking about a pathway, Jamin. You said, how do we get there? Well, before we can get there, we have to know where there is. We have to know where we're going before we can go anywhere. And we don't know where we're going. We don't know how to put a plan together that we can survive with. And we don't know what that plan would look like. So it's overwhelming. And I keep saying it, but it's really hard to, it just seems to fall on deaf ears. But we can develop this plan. And what we need is a vision for where there is, for what we can do, what the new world would look like that we would have to live in order to provide sustainable life. And the reason we don't think of this world or plan this is because every time we try, every road gets blocked by money. Money makes it impossible. So the way we go around that is we build a platform for humanity to come to and join together. And we create a vision together. And that vision is of a world without money. What I'm saying is we can tell ourselves where there is by creating a world, a vision of the world. And the only way we will be able to create that vision is if we envision it without money. because that once you start looking at it at the future without money, a whole new way of looking at the world opens up that we don't see because we're trained. We're trained. The way we grow up and live and everything about our lives is revolves around money. We can't imagine living without money, and that's the problem. Because we don't imagine living without money, so we don't see that whole possibility. We don't even think it's possible, so we don't even think about it. And I'm just saying that it is possible, and if you start thinking about it, this whole new world, that is the pathway out, as far as I'm concerned. Thanks.
Thanks, Adam. I'm up next in the queue. I'm the only one in the queue at the moment. So, one comment I want to make, responding to you, Adam, and then I want to respond to some things Dan said, is, you say, in terms of a pathway to get there, we first need to know where we're going, right? And to get to know where we're going, we need to create a platform with which we can create this vision, and then we can create the plan and all that. I just want to point out this whole thing that we're talking about, the problem, the meta problem, et cetera, it has chicken and egg written all over it. And there's so many things that we can say, but we need to start with this first. Until we have this, then we won't have, what comes next. Think of it as a big multi-dimensional chicken and egg dynamic. With chicken and egg, you just have two things, chicken and egg. Well, imagine we had 3 or 4 or 5, and everything impacts everything else. What's my point? My point is there actually is no obvious pathway. When an obvious pathway emerges, we'll know because we'll immediately get right on it and go somewhere, right? We're stuck, right? And, I could be colorful and say that we're screwed. But we're stuck, but I am committed to us getting unstuck. I'm not giving up. None of us are giving up. That's why we're here. Yes, we need a platform. Yes, we need a vision. I maintain that we actually have a vision of what the world could look like, a world where humanity is operating much more like an ant colony than like, a bunch of, paranoid dudes with handguns like Humphrey Bogart at the end of one of his movies where he's in some desperate state and he's just looking out for himself, which is what we're trending towards now. How to get there, I definitely agree that doing away with money is a vital part of it. Could you imagine an anthill where these ants have to stop and transact before they either share information or share material? It's absurd. They just work together like a well-oiled machine, and it just works. That's how humanity needs to start working with each other and with Mother Earth and all of our species and ecosystems. But the question is, how do we get there? So I'm saying we've got a beginning of a vision. We've got a beginning of a platform. We're here. We're all working together, collaborating on a platform, but it's just the beginning of one. What I'm working on for a specific community that I can't name is actually putting together both the conversation at an intellectual, step-by-step, what do we need to do level, but also the grieving, the gratitude, the grieving that precedes that, the gratitude that precedes even that. And it would also include a community cafe component to create a space where people can come together and have all these conversations and invite the rest of the world to come in and join us. So, we've all got our little idea as to how we solve the chicken and egg problem. And I'm just pointing out that none of these are proven yet, so we have to keep tinkering until we find the pathway that will actually be a self-reinforcing feedback loop, virtuous cycle that will get this whole thing to grow. Now on to what Dan mentioned. is, at a meta level, people have to step up. And you were saying essentially step out of this whole tribalism thing and step up to a higher level. Well, what we're doing here represents that higher level. What we're talking about with the platform is intended to create an even higher level, and so on and so on. Part of the platform is technological, communication, internet-based, etc. But part of it is the community cafe that we're going to build that will actually bring people together in conversation face-to-face. Dan, you talked about the College of Complexes in Chicago as an example of that. It's a great example. Melissa and I were at the Cleveland City Club a few months ago, similar kind of thing, but a bit more upscale and broadcast on the radio and whatnot. That's well known, the Cleveland City Club. So we need to find kind of like a ladder. Think of like a fish ladder, but a ladder for helping humanity to step up and step up and step up, and also commit to keep coming back and keep stepping up and in to this higher level. I'm at 5 minutes now, so I'm going to move towards wrapping. Fred, did you want to jump in? Dan's up next in the queue. I had threatened to volunteer you into the queue. Yeah, go ahead, Fred. Take it away, and then Dan. And you're on mute, Fred.
I have one question for Adam. Given the circumstances we find ourselves in, do you think it's realistic right now to replace money? And I mean, money is just a form of currency. I just can't imagine a world. I mean, it's a great idea that we'd operate like an ant colony with lots and lots of people willing to, sacrifice their lives, sort of like without even questioning whether or not it's the right thing, because that's what ants do. It's just, a world without currency seems impossibly complicated. I mean, to me, please tell me I'm wrong. I just, currency to me is, money is just currency, and it can be, buttons, seashells, or anything. There's got to be a way to move stuff that, with a common denominator, or whatever you want to call it.
Can I answer your question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so how do we you asked how can we realistically replace the world money, develop. So what I'm saying is the beauty of this, the reason it works is because on the platform, we create a vision of how to live after the collapse comes. The only way we can create that vision, and I've been looking at this really seriously, and I see that the only way we can create that vision is if we remove money from that vision. And now it's really hard to imagine that. So, but when we do start imagining it, this whole new world opens up of opportunities. So in the meantime, while we're building this vision, the lives we live in don't change. We're not changing. I'm not trying to get the world we live in to change. What I'm saying is we build a vision for the way out. And the only way we can build that vision is that will work is to build it without money. The vision that we have to build is for the children of humanity to be able to survive the future. It's not for us. We need a completely different change, a completely different way of living on Earth, and that way will require the end of all money. And I know that you think that's ridiculous, but if we build a vision of it without it changing, I'm saying we don't have a vision for a change, for what there is, for how to go there. We don't know what we would change to. The reason we don't know what to change to is because it's overwhelming. Because we don't, and what I'm saying is if we envision a way to change that doesn't include money, then we can come up with the answers. And, because all of a sudden like if you take money and if you take the 40-hour work week, and if you start looking at how much of that 40-hour work week is contributed towards money, and how it causes us to have all these different choices in the store and have all these different all this waste that we create, we can reduce and have everything that we need and want for that future. We can build this vision, and we can have a work week that's down to 10 or 15 hours a week. Now, if we have a work week that's down to 10 or 15 hours a week, and you don't have to pay for your food or your mortgage or anything anymore, everything's free, and we can have a volunteer workforce. That's how we do it. And by removing money, we remove the inhibitor that we make all decisions. Our decisions will be made based on logic. Because right now, all of our decisions are based on money. Corporations, the real leader of a corporation is not human, it's money. And all our politics, every decision that we make is based on finances. And it's just like Dan said, if there's a way to make money, if we don't do it, somebody else will. So every decision we make is based on money instead of reality. And that's why we're so screwed up, because we make illogical, irrational decisions. Because they're not made based on logic. They're made based on money. So we can build this new vision on a platform.
Can I respond to that? Adam, I thank you for trying to explain that, and I love your soul. You're a good human being. I just think that given the circumstances right now, the requirements for people on a global scale, because what's going to happen is global. It's not, going to happen in isolation. Is just requires, where I get to in our discussions is thinking, God, we talked about this revolution in consciousness. And my God, in 2,000 years, we're not a whole lot further along than, we were 2,000 years ago. And we're more tribal now, it seems, and we have heavier duty weapons. And I just don't see many examples in public life of people cooperating in a mutual and reciprocal way. There's always somebody trying to get an advantage. And President Trump is the poster child for that. Everything he does is self-serving or to make America great. Fuck the rest of the world. It's got to be to our benefit. So, with the most powerful country in the world being led by a person with that attitude and a rapture mentality, I just find it really difficult to get to the notion of, okay, we're going to do away with money. You're a person who says, well, we've got to have a plan. Like, where are we going? Well, I think that's a good point. what are some ideas for a world without money? I mean, without currency. Do away with the word money. I mean, currency, something that people can exchange. Because, yeah.
You don't need it. You don't need it. That's why I say, if you look at it, if you start looking at it, you'll start realizing that you don't need money. Now, we grow up, we are told and we learn that that's all we learn. That's all we know. So it's very hard for us to imagine how a world could live without money. But our anthropological studies show that our Homo sapiens species originated like 315,000 years ago. So we only started, civilization only began maybe about 7,000 years ago. So we lived a long time without money. And we lived really, that was the perfect form of life. When we started using money, that's when everything starts going crazy. And that's where all the conflicts come from. And it exacerbates every one of the 7 deadly sins. You have to start being able to imagine, and I told you a good example, the 40-hour work week. We have so much waste, and it's all created because of money. I went into a Walmart store and counted the selections of toothpaste. There was 300 different selections of toothpaste. And this wasn't even a huge Walmart store. I mean, the selections we have are incredible, and that is what is destroying it. The world, if we're going to design a world for the future, we're going to have to design a world that's completely different. They won't have.
It sounds kind of monochromatic. I mean, the world you're envisioning is all one color. It's all based on, functionality and people like choices. I mean, that's what makes life rich in a way, is if you.
But that's not the future life. These people are going to be facing hardly anything to eat. So what do you think is going to be most important to them? Food or many selections at the store? Economy or drinking water? I mean, that's the world we have to prepare for.
Okay, well, I just, I keep hearkening back to the notion of time running out and the things that you're suggesting. And, I get what you'd like to happen. It's just, there's the time factor, and it's not like things are static. And we have no idea, once these food shortages start, or once the garbage stops getting picked up, it doesn't take long for things to go to hell. And like I mentioned a long time ago, the von Clausewitz and all of that about planning for war. You don't know what's going to happen in a battle until you engage. So we can plan on. I have to go. And Adam, I want to say I love you. Your heart, you have a big heart, and I just can't. Maybe I don't understand what you're saying, but it just.
Yes, you don't.
I don't use the word money. Even though I agree with you that everything is governed by it, let's just say currency, because it's either going to be seashells or something. But people, because
I just want to say one thing: there aren't any plans out there.
No.
Nobody. You can look all over. There aren't any plans that really work. I mean, there are parts of plans like Shaylee Strauss with vegetarianism. I think that's really good, but we need a place to put it all together and make a vision to how to, and the way we can do that is envisioning this world without money. And there aren't any other answers. So it's time to start looking at that. I mean, if you have another answer, then please come out with it. But if you don't, then take a look at it, because it's worth looking at. And if you don't understand it, then that's the problem.
Well, and look, and I'm thinking about it, right? That's the problem. There are many more people who haven't even gotten to this point where, we're talking about these things. So once again, the determining factor is time, as I see it, is you're asking for revolutionary behavior in so many seemingly insoluble areas.
I'm just looking at the problem and I'm saying, what do we need to do to solve the problem? That's all I'm doing. So you're looking at the problem and you're saying, well, it's so big, we can't solve it. So why not? I'm not even going to try. I'm going to keep complaining about it.
Hey, I'm here.
I know, and I appreciate you. I love you too. It's just this is the only way that I've heard and seen that can actually work. And people like you, because we are raised to think we have to live with money. We are not able to imagine and how to live without it. And I'm just saying that once you start imagining that, it does come to life, and you have to start really imagining it and putting it in, because our hunter-gatherers ancestors didn't use money, and they lived on this earth a lot longer than we have.
Hey, there weren't as many of them as there are now.
Right.
That's an issue. Anyway, you guys,
reduce our population too. I mean, we can do it in a voluntary manner. I've already explained this in the Road to Life plan that I wrote, that I put on YouTube.
The voluntary, right there.
Yeah. Okay. Let me arbitrate a little bit here, and Fred, if you could just hang in here for a minute. So Adam has a vision for the future where humanity is tremendously evolved, way evolved past where we are right now, and where we are effectively operating like an anthill in something that I would imagine would be, and if you don't mind muting Adam, something that would be kind of like a command economy, but instead of some dictator at the top like Mussolini, it would be collective intelligence that's guiding us. And I also believe that money is is one of a number of poisons at the heart of our problems. And I too imagine a future where we're highly evolved out of this. And I believe that it must not include money. That doesn't mean.
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm going to have to go. I wanted to jump in with one final thought, listening to Adam and Fred, and just Adam, you ought to come out to the College of Complexes here in Chicago and see how people might respond. Different, mostly well-educated individuals. But here's the thing. The anthill and that Howard Bloom, and I think it was his Lucifer Principle book, explains, maybe it was a different, but anyway, he explains what goes on with the ants is a number of ants go off in different directions looking for food, solution to survival. Some of those ants are going to go down. They're not going to find any food. But one will hit. The more that, in a sense, the more there is attempts, the more likely something will catch fire. And I just, this thing with money, it's interesting. I would say, I would agree with Fred that you're going to have some sort of medium of exchange. However, the problem, one of the problems with money, and it's something going on right now here in the world and the United States, and it has to do with currencies, maybe cryptocurrencies are kind of linked in, where you have this situation where, and there was an excellent article put out today by Paul Craig Roberts, who puts out some pretty good stuff on the economy, I have to say. And what he was pointing out is a couple of things. One, the deindustrialization is a huge problem done for purposes of greed, which of course has to do with money. But what he's pointing out, and I think this is pretty significant, two things. One, he's talking about the plunge protection team, which has been out there for a long time. And the plunge protection team is basically the Federal Reserve can go into the stock market. It can go into any of these markets. And so what they've been doing for a period of time is if there starts to be a big sell-off in the market, they just go in, buy a bunch of, S&P futures or whatever, and that just stops, and they tip off their compadres, maybe about a week in advance or something. We're going into the market. Maybe now it's time for you to cover your shorts and make some money and get out. And that's one thing. And they also can do it with the gold market. If the gold starts to, be going too far, too fast, they can go into the market and short the gold futures. And that'll bring it down and let everybody know now's the time to take profits, all you bankers, et cetera. And then, you can ratchet up again. There's always money to be made. That's the problem with money in a way. And with the currencies, one of the big world dynamics going on is the fact that the United States, with the Federal Reserve and being, the currency where oil gets traded in, you have to get the dollars and a lot of other commodities. And right now, what's happening is other countries like Russia and China and India and others are talking about we don't want to be tethered to the dollar. And at a certain point in time, the dollar may no longer be viable, or it may no longer have anything like the value that it has right now, because we can just keep printing money, creating all sorts of debt. And I would say the debt, which is connected to money, we loan you money so you can have consumer purchasing power to get all these things. That's a huge problem. And that's what's been going on for a long time to cover up how really economically devastated most people in the United States actually are. So when you look at these things, you have to, and I would say, what happens, and as Fred was saying about Trump, I could not agree more with, Donald Trump, when he started out running for president. I'll never forget it. At some speech, he goes, I was very greedy. And he does this with his arms. I wanted everything for me and my family. And now I'm going to do it for the country. He goes like that. Now I'm going to do for the country what I did for myself. And that's a huge problem that he doesn't even have a clue about.
Is that everything you're saying is that money, this world of money that we live in, we cannot beat it. And I agree with you. It's so complex, we can't beat it. The only way we can beat it is to work around it. And that way of working around it is to create a vision of the new world.
Well, yeah, Adam.
And then that's how we do it.
It's not the new world exactly. And this is something, too, that needs to be taken account of. Yeah, you can go back to hunting-gathering days, and when, there was no population overshoot and a zillion other things. But we can go back a little ways. We've had good recent historical experience where it's not exactly that money was eliminated, but control of an economy was imposed, like in China for a period of time. And not only, and once everybody needs to think, about what's been, what historical circumstances do we have where there's a certain kind of control. And yeah, if we get to a collapse around the world, all sorts of things may happen. But short of that, when you talk, you're in North Korea, that's a place where, for example, things are pretty tightly controlled. You had Russia, you had the Soviet Union, you had China, you had places in Eastern Europe. We've had lots of examples because it's human nature. Human nature, who's going to be the one to determine this or that? And so, I would just say that cooperation, in order to have cooperation, people have to understand what the problems are, what solutions in the past have been tried, never worked, probably can't work, and what can we do in the present based on the past to go forward, into the future. And as long as people are ignorant about things, most people could understand a lot of things if it was put out there and, kind of logically explained. What I just said about the plunge protection team, if I were to say that to most people, what would they say? They would say, well, what are you talking about? The Federal Reserve is going in. They don't go, well, free markets. We have free markets. How can the Federal Reserve go in there and control the direction of the stock market or the gold market? There was a day when that wasn't happening the way it is now, but things have really gone downhill since we've had the outsourcing and the deindustrialization and the creation of all sorts of fiat money by all the in Europe and in China, all over the world. The central banks have done this. And that was in part here in the United States to give people some money so they could go out and buy consumer goods, because they sure couldn't get it any longer when American workers, for example, have to compete with, kind of the sweatshop, ice slave kind of stuff over in China. It can't happen. And so how do you understand, anything without people being given the opportunity to learn about things, to understand things? Final thing, and then I got to go. When I worked public health, and like I've said before, public health is a corrupt entity. It's just basically, the governmental public health organizations know full well they need to bow down to corporate interests. You can't say anything too bad, and people, and also in all of the advocacy organizations, the Diabetes Association taking money from Coca-Cola and all the other products that cause you to have diabetes. They're corrupted, even though it may be they're good people trying to do a good thing. They're corrupted. And it's the same thing. And if you don't, American Diabetes Association, if you don't want to take our money, well, we'll just withdraw it, and then we'll give it to another organization who's willing to take it. They'll become the new advocacy organization, and you'll be over. And without those kinds of things being talked about, and again, and really with where we're at right now, it's been a compounding of so many things. And final thing, I think Jamin, if this compassionate cafe concept, if it's able to, again, include a component kind of where people are able to be engaged in conversation and education, and also to try to intersect with the leadership in various communities, then you do have a chance of mobilizing certain kinds of support for solutions. And I think and again, even though it may be too late for anything, we still got, the ants still got to go out of the home, out of the homeland and try to find the food. And I think that's what we're trying to do. I think that's, and I just think, at the end of the day, it's pretty good work. Anyway, I got to get going, guys. And, I'll look forward to meeting next week. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Great to see you. Great to see everyone. I know Fred needs to go too. I'm kind of running out of steam myself. So any last comments before we wrap for today?
Adam, giving you a big hug, buddy. Are you still there?
Yeah, same here, Fred.
Yeah. Keep up the good work. And when you figure out, when you can more clearly describe your vision or a vision for the future without currency, I'm open to hearing it. I'm a pretty cynical at this point.
Videos? Have you listened to the Road to Life plan videos?
Okay.
I
Hey,
haven't.
take care. I gotta go. Jamin, I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Fred.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. See you soon. Thanks. All right. Any last words, Adam, before we wrap?
No, well, it's just really difficult to to get people to see what I see. But there's no other answers out there, so I don't see why people shouldn't want to at least look at because Dan and everybody keeps saying, well, we have to do this and we have to do that, we have to, and humanity can't do this, and we've got all these problems. Well, we can. The way we do it is we don't do it in reality. We fix the problems in digital reality, and then when we get it perfect enough, we get that vision built enough, then people will have something to show people, and people will say, well, yeah, that's the way to go. Then we can get out.
I agree with you, Adam. The big problem is right now we're on a sinking ship, and different people aboard the ship, ourselves included, have visions for how we can stop the ship from sinking.
Who has that vision? I don't see any visions out there.
You have a vision.
I do, but I don't see any others that are really putting.
I have a vision.
Yeah, but will your vision work, sustain life in the future?
Yes.
How are you going to use money and be able to do that?
I'm not. No money in my vision for the future.
Okay, so what your vision is to build a platform, right? And that's what my vision is too. And then all these ideas, humanity can have a place to come together, use our modern technology. So this is the first time in the history of humanity where we'd be able to come together with using our technology. And we can even come together without a language barrier, face to face, with our technology of instantaneous voice translation. So I can talk to somebody in China. I mean, there's a lot of really appealing things about the platform that can be made.
I'm just saying, do you need to convince me of that? I'm all about the platform.
Right. So I mean, anyway, I'm all for with you and getting this platform up. I just see it slightly different than you, but I think we're both close enough to get it. We just need to give humanity a place, a way to join and get the platform going. And, a place to go to and start.
That's what we're working on. So let's keep at it.
Yeah, that's what I'm working on. That's what you're working on, and we're doing it in our own ways, as fast as we can.
All right, brother. Let's stop recording and broadcasting, and then we can just wrap up, you and I. Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next week, same time, on the Social Club at the End of This World. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everybody.